Again, here's Sean Leslie.
All right, welcome back. Max Abrahms on the phone, a terrorism expert at Northeastern University. We'll get to some calls in a moment as we're speaking about Obama saying today that the U.S. should take military action against Syria. Just before we get to the calls, though, Mr. Abrams, you said before the break, you talked about the moral outrage of the gas attack on civilians. And I don't disagree with you, but, you know, we are talking about a civil war where 100,000 people have been killed over the last couple of years. Why does it make a difference? And I don't mean to be insensitive saying this, but why is there a difference in people being killed by gas as opposed to, you know, bombs, bullets?
Yeah, from a moral perspective, I don't see a huge difference. I mean, a gas attack is not instantaneous, as a lot of people think. You know, you could writhe in pain for a couple of days, but the same is also true of dying through, say, fire and arson. You know, there are all sorts of different ways to go. I'm not sure that a chemical attack death is worse than any others. But there is actually a strategic rationale for why the U.S. would be more opposed to chemical attacks than, say, conventional attacks. And the reason is that the U.S. has military superiority when it comes to conventional weapons. Really, the Achilles heel for the United States are these WMD. And so the U.S. has a strong strategic interest in maintaining what's sometimes referred to as the, you know, weapons of mass destruction taboo. The idea that under no circumstances should they be used. So I'm not sure that there's a strong moral difference, but there certainly is a strategic difference.
If you had to guess, and the president was clear, no boots on the grounds, but what kind of military action might we be thinking of? Are we talking cruise missiles fired from warships, and where, you know, what do you shoot at?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I think it's, you know, the U.S. is very war-weary after Iraq and Afghanistan. There isn't support for nation building. It's not clear on the ground whether we could support, say, the Syrian rebels versus, you know, al-Qaeda elements. And so we don't want to get too involved in the domestic situation there. The idea would be to lob maybe 100, 200 cruise missiles from the Mediterranean. I guess the U.S. has 5 destroyers there, and the idea would be to, A, deter the Assad regime and indeed other leaders of rogue states from using WMD, as well as to trick some of his forces to perhaps shift the power, the balance of power to the rebel forces without exactly taking ownership over the outcome of the civil war there.
Even though we don't know if the rebel forces will be good for Western interests, but I want to take some calls at 604-280-9898. Pete in Vancouver. Pete, hi.
Hi. 2 points. One, even though, yes, the U.S. has lied in the past to go to war, Cuba, Vietnam, Iraq, that doesn't mean they lie every single time. And if you look at that attack, if Assad didn't do it, he would have Western inspectors on the ground. He would invite them in open arms right away. He wouldn't have shelled those neighborhoods repeatedly to get rid of evidence because he'd want to make the rebels look bad. So forgetting any SIGINT intel that they've got, that alone, and that there are rebel neighborhoods proves it. And secondly, in terms of deterrence, he's got tons, plural, tons of chemical weapons. You know, there hasn't been that much used, but if he gets away with this cost-free, he's going to do it again. You can kill more people with weapons of mass destruction. That's why they're called mass destruction. And other people can do it. So if you may not be able to stop him totally, but you can inflict the cost. And if we don't inflict the cost, he's going to do it again. Other people will do it, and a larger body count will result.
Good call, Pete. And Max Abrahms, I keep hearing this. It's on the internet and all this false flag. It was the U.S. that actually did this, or, what have you, to try to foment some kind of unrest. Is there any doubt in your mind that it was the Assad regime that used the chemical weapons?
No, there's really no doubt. I have a lot of trust in the people making these assessments of the intel situation, Kerry and Obama, et cetera. And the evidence, although we haven't actually seen all the evidence that we do know of seems pretty strong. We have radio intercepts where basically members of the Assad regime are talking rather openly about, their use of chemical weapons. The areas where the chemical weapons were shot into were not, they weren't shot at Assad forces, but they were shot out of Assad territory.
Right.
Also, it was a pretty high dosage that was used, and so the evidence goes on and on. Also, the Assad regime tried to block the inspectors, and so together, I feel very confident in saying that Assad's side is responsible for the chemical attack. I'll go on record saying that.
Alex in Vancouver on the open lines. Alex, hi.
I look at it a couple of ways. One is we're Canadian and we don't really have any business interfering in Syria's affairs right now, although we should support our NATO allies, of course. That's very important. But the second thing is the restraint that Israel has shown by not bombing Damascus, by not trying to go after Assad themselves, by not sending in a team to assassinate Assad, because they know the humanitarian cost that he's wreaking right now, including all the refugees. Don't forget about the 900,000 refugees.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure that Max Abrahms, what is Israel's best interest here? Because they have been very quiet.
Yeah, Israel obviously cares very deeply about what's going on its northern border. Israel has a lot of technology and missile defense. In particular, they have an Iron Dome system, which they've brought to the northern border. The Israeli government says that it's going to do its best to stay out unless it's provoked. Interestingly, about two-thirds of the Israeli public is in favor of Western intervention, not Israeli intervention. But it's interesting to note that that's a higher percentage of the national population than from other countries. In the U.S., support for Western intervention is lower. Same as in Britain, probably the same as in Canada. I know for a fact the same is true in France. So in general, the Israeli public is on board with intervention, but the government seems to be holding fire unless provoked.
Interesting. Susan in Coquitlam. Susan, you're going to get the last word. We're almost out of time. Go ahead.
Speaking as a mother with one child who has second and third degree burns down both legs, these people are doing that deliberately to their children. You can imagine where the rest of us stand. Where Syria is major hub for trade that affects that as well. So if they're doing that to their own children and even shooting at the UN, either we stand up to this or I live close to schools, community centers, and everything else. It's a scary thought because exactly what could happen to them is exactly what's happening. And President Barack Obama, a constitutional lawyer, dumped it right back where it belongs. Is this what you want? You don't think it couldn't happen to Americans in America, in North America, or any other Western democracy? Think again.
Susan, got to leave it there. Max Abrahms, thank you very much for your time. Max Abrahms, based at Northeastern University. We'll break for the 2:30 news. If you couldn't get through, send me an email. Ask Leslie at CKNW.com. We'll be right back.